Today, we're diving into the enigmatic world of North Korea, a place often described as dangerous, and for good reason. Recently, the world was on high alert as North Korea conducted yet another test of its intercontinental ballistic missile, triggering widespread concern. In a bold move, Jong-un showcased the nation's most powerful nuclear missiles to key Chinese and Russian officials. This provocative launch marked a significant event in months. Published photos in North Korea's state newspaper claimed to reveal small nuclear warheads designed for short-range missiles. Unsurprisingly, Japan swiftly condemned this, citing it as an unacceptable threat to regional stability. It's moments like these that underscore North Korea's status as an outlier, a realm of unpredictability led by the Kim dynasty, with Kim Jong-un at the helm. What makes North Korea particularly intriguing, or perhaps unsettling, is its status as one of the most mysterious nations on the planet. The country is hidden in secrecy, and much of our knowledge about it stems from intelligence and the accounts of those brave few who managed to escape its confines. To emphasize its isolation, consider this: there's a shoot-to-kill order for anyone approaching its Chinese border. That's the level of closed-off we're talking about. Now, when it comes to the citizens of North Korea, they live in a bubble of misinformation, shielded from the outside world by Kim Jong-un's iron-fisted control. Simply possessing foreign media content can land you in jail for up to 15 years. That's how tight the grip on information is. The level of censorship and propaganda is so extreme that it makes China look like a stronghold of freedom. However, this front of control is showing signs of cracking. Economic hardships and hunger are knocking on the nation's door, challenging the very foundations of this house of fear and military rule. Could this be the beginning of the end for North Korea as we know it? In this video, we're exploring deep into the history of North Korea, exploring its roots, the rise of the Kim dynasty, the secrets behind its prolonged survival, and questioning whether a future exists for the nation. Now, before we dive into the historical depths, let's take a moment to ensure the future of this channel. Liking and commenting on this video may seem simple, but it's a powerful way to let the algorithm know you appreciate our content, helping the channel thrive. With that said, let's get back to the basics. Let's dig into the intricate history of North Korea, a nation shaped by a long and often somber past that profoundly influences its present state. To comprehend the current scenario, we must take a journey back in time and explore the roots of this relatively young nation. Contrasting with countries like the 247-year-old United States, North Korea's history began in the aftermath of World War II, around 1945. Prior to this, the entire Korean peninsula had endured Japanese rule since 1910, a period marked by the suppression of Korean culture and heritage. The defeat of Japan in 1945 marked a turning point, granting Korea its freedom. The territorial shift from Japan resulted in the division of Korea along the 38th parallel, with the United States occupying the South and the Soviet Union taking charge of the North. However, tensions escalated as the Soviet Union, responsible for the administration of the North, disregarded the UN mandate for nationwide democratic elections. This disregard led the United States to declare the democratically elected government of South Korea as the sole legitimate authority on the Korean peninsula. This decision by the United Nations heightened tensions significantly, setting the stage for the complex dynamics we see today. The culmination of these tensions saw the communist leadership in the North, led by Kim Il-sung, rejecting the United Nations proclamation and asserting its sole right to rule Korea. This pivotal moment, marked by Kim Il-sung's proclamation, laid the foundation for the establishment of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, on September 9, 1948. With significant backing from the Soviet Union, Kim Il-sung wielded considerable autonomy. The DPRK, under Kim Il-sung's leadership, claimed exclusive legitimacy over the entire Korean peninsula, designating Seoul as its capital. This move, however, was met with strong opposition. The repercussions of this ideological conflict materialized swiftly, leading to a significant turning point on June 25, 1950. Approximately 75,000 soldiers from the northern Korean peninsula crossed the 38th parallel, marking the onset of the Korean War. During this tumultuous time, President Harry Truman voiced a sentiment that underscored the gravity of the situation. If we let Korea down, the Soviets will keep right on going and swallow up one place after another. The United States held a profound conviction about the importance of this endeavor, reflecting the passion invested in the conflict. However, this fervor encountered the unyielding will of North Korea, creating formidable challenges for the Allied forces, comprising America, South Korea, and their allies. The Southern forces found themselves somewhat caught off guard, grappling with fear, confusion, and a lack of battle-hardened experience. The scorching and arid summer of that period exacerbated the difficulties. Thirsty American soldiers, in desperate need of water, often resorted to drinking from rice paddies fertilized with human waste. The consequences were dire, turning the surroundings into breeding grounds for disease and infection, further complicating an already challenging wartime scenario. While the Allied forces, particularly the American and South Korean units, were grappling with challenges, the North Korean army presented a formidable contrast. Disciplined, well-trained, and well-equipped, they entered the war thoroughly prepared, and their initial offensives reflected this readiness. The initial months of the conflict witnessed dynamic movements up and down the Korean peninsula, with the North Korean forces driving United Nations command forces to a confined perimeter around the port of Pusan at the southern tip of the peninsula. The situation shifted when General MacArthur, leading the Allied forces, executed a strategic move in September 1950 with an amphibious landing at Incheon, catching the North Koreans off guard. This maneuver compelled the North Koreans to retreat behind the 38th parallel. While the Incheon landing and subsequent assault were tactically successful, they brought about unintended consequences. As American troops crossed the 38th parallel, moving north toward the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and Communist China, concerns arose in China about protecting themselves from what they perceived as armed aggression against Chinese territory. The dynamics of the war were about to take a significant and unexpected turn. The entry of Chinese leader Mao Zedong into the Korean War added a new dimension. Mao, responding to the perceived threat to North Korea, dispatched Chinese troops and issued a stern warning to the United States. Stay away from the Yalu boundary unless you want a full-scale war. While China had already been a supporter of North Korea's communist agenda, risking a direct conflict with China was a prospect the United Nations was eager to avoid. However, the United States, fueled by its staunch anti-communist stance, was less hesitant. In October, the United Nations, under the influence of the United States government, endorsed the movement of UN forces across the 38th parallel into North Korea, with the aim of unifying the country under a non-communist government. Despite the warnings from the Chinese government, the UN forces pressed on towards the Yalu River, approaching the North Korean border with Manchuria. The stage was now set for a pivotal chapter in the Korean War, as global powers tiptoed on the precipice of a broader conflict. However, this momentum was not sustained for long. By early 1951, the Chinese offensive had lost its steam. The United Nations Command, now reinforced by the revitalized 8th U.S. Army under the leadership of General Matthew B. Ridgway, reclaimed Seoul from the Communists and advanced back to the 38th parallel. The tides had turned, and the UNC forces were back within their own territory. The Korean War, marked by its rapid shifts and intense battles, continued to unfold with twists and turns that would shape the region's history for years to come. From July 1951 until the cessation of hostilities, the battle lines remained relatively stable, and the Korean War ground to what effectively became a stalemate. The toll on human lives was immense, and despite the sacrifices, there was minimal change on the ground. The Truman administration, realizing the limited progress and with millions of lives lost, abandoned its initial goal of reunifying North and South Korea and eradicating communism from the peninsula. The focus shifted to avoiding the potential escalation of the conflict into a Third World War involving China and the Soviet Union. Upon assuming office after Truman, President Eisenhower succinctly captured the prevailing sentiment. We could not stand forever on a static front and continue to accept casualties without any visible results. Small attacks on small hills would not end this war. Eisenhower, recognizing the need for a change in approach, sought to bring an end to the violence that had gripped the peninsula. Employing a combination of coercion and incentives, he aimed to navigate a path toward resolution and peace. The Korean War, once filled with fervor and ambition, had reached a point where a new strategy was required to bring about a conclusion to the conflict. President Eisenhower achieved his objective by securing an armistice on July 27, 1953. The United States, cognizant of the need for lasting peace to prevent a wider conflict with Russia and China, or even the specter of World War II, worked diligently toward this goal. However, despite the fierce war waged on the fronts, America's withdrawal left the Korean peninsula as divided as it had been since the close of World War II at the 38th parallel. The aftermath revealed not much tangible change, but rather a landscape spoiled by the casualties of soldiers and civilians, a dark reality where their deaths brought no measurable shift in the geopolitical sense. By the time the armistice marked the end of the war, over 5 million soldiers and civilians had lost their lives in what many in the United States came to call the Forgotten War. This title reflects the relative lack of attention the conflict received compared to more widely recognized wars like World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War. The Korean peninsula remains divided today along similar borders, with the two sides agreeing on a demarcation formed by the Korean Demilitarized Zone. It's worth noting an interesting fact about North and South Korea. Because the two nations never signed an official peace treaty, they technically remain at war since 1950. This peculiar state has frozen the conflict in time, creating a situation often referred to as a frozen war. Kim Jong-il's consolidation of power in North Korea involved tightening control over politics and eliminating perceived threats. This included purging individuals who were deemed responsible for the perceived failure of the southern population to support North Korea during the war. An official named Pak Han-young, who held key positions such as the National Party's vice chairman and foreign minister of DPRK, was blamed for this failure and executed after a show trial in 1955. Similarly, South Korean leftists who defected to the North between 1945 and 1953 faced charges of spying or other crimes against the state, leading to executions, imprisonment, or exile to remote areas. This period marked the beginning of a series of purges orchestrated by Kim Jong-il, allowing him to solidify absolute power in the nation. The use of the secret police played a crucial role in internal political matters, enabling Kim to eliminate rivals and establish a godlike status for the Kims in North Korea. With internal matters addressed, Kim Jong-il initiated efforts to rebuild the nation, announcing the 1954 to 1956 three-year plan. The plan aimed to repair the extensive damage caused by the war and restore industrial production to pre-war levels. Kim Jong-un followed his initial three-year plan with a five-year plan from 1957 to 1961, and subsequently a seven-year plan spanning from 1961 to 1967. While on paper, these plans might have seemed like a recipe for success, the stark reality was quite different. Far from swimming in wealth like Daffy Duck, North Korea faced significant challenges as these plans failed to deliver the promised growth, industrial production, and substantial development of state infrastructure. Despite state-controlled organs proclaiming North Korea as the second most industrialized nation in East Asia by the 1960s, trailing only Japan, this was largely regarded as pure propaganda. In truth, North Korea was facing severe economic hardships. Kim's aggressive military ventures and total state control of the economy had placed the nation in a dire position. Several blunders, including the forced implementation of agricultural cooperatives, exacerbated the economic struggles. In 1954, the dictatorship initiated a partial activation, pressuring peasants into agricultural cooperatives. By 1958, these collectives dominated farming, progressively merging into larger units. The challenge lay in the fact that this collectivization was enforced rather than organic, leading to subpar production levels that fell short of Kim's aspirations. The economy was teetering on the brink of collapse, reflecting the consequences of ill-conceived policies and forced measures. The aftermath of the conflict saw significant increases in expenditure for electricity production, steel manufacturing, and machine building. The government prioritized the production of tractors and agricultural machinery in large quantities, though there was little corresponding increase in agricultural output. By 1958, North Korea's economy heavily relied on aid from the Soviet Union and China, resulting in a standard of living dramatically lower than that of South Korea. Despite the plain reality of malnutrition and food shortages, the state-controlled press painted an overly optimistic picture. Those daring to contradict the official narrative, asserting that North Korean agriculture surpassed South Korea's and that the North Korean standard of living far exceeded that of South Koreans, faced consequences. The secret police force, under Kim Jong-un's command, often silenced dissenting voices with nighttime visits, leaving individuals unheard from again. The grim disparity between propaganda and reality persisted, creating a challenging environment for the population. The late 1950s and 1960s witnessed a rapid decline in the standards of living in North Korea, exacerbated by the collectivization of farms. Kim's authoritarian grip on the police, army, and media played a pivotal role in preventing the North Korean farmer from rising up in a classic peasant revolt. Adding to the discontent was the chronic shortage of consumer goods, a consequence of the state-controlled mandate for production, rather than responding to consumer demand, as seen in the South. North Korea's economic model mirrored the Soviet Union's, where production quotas were dictated by the state without consideration for the actual needs of consumers. This top-down approach resulted in unwanted goods accumulating on shelves, while high-demand items faced long waiting lists, leading to severe shortages of essentials. In essence, the marketplace was not determining what factories produced. The nation's survival during this period was heavily reliant on massive aid from Russia and China, driven by ideological motivations to advance world communism. Meanwhile, Kim utilized his police force to cultivate an image as a godlike figure, demanding worship from the people of North Korea. Dissent from this narrative resulted in imprisonment or, as previously noted, death. The precarious economic situation and strict authoritarian measures created an environment where survival hinged on external support and allegiance to the regime's imposed narrative. Kim Jong-un, much like the current North Korean leadership, went to great lengths to present an image of prosperity to the outside world. However, this facade was carefully crafted, as visitors to North Korea were accompanied by state-appointed guides, strictly following prearranged routes and only witnessing carefully prepared city streets. Any North Korean citizen caught speaking with an international visitor without permission faced the severe consequences of imprisonment or death. The restrictive nature of such interactions epitomized the closed-off reality of North Korea, where individual freedoms were tightly controlled and dissent was met with harsh consequences. The North Korean press, under strict state control, depicted the country as an alternative to the capitalist model sponsored by the United States. Official announcements claimed that by the late 1960s, North Korea provided all its citizens with medical care, universal education, adequate caloric intake, and livable housing. However, these proclamations were far from accurate, falling into the realm of falsehoods. In reality, North Korea allocated the highest spending on military forces per capita in relation to GDP, leaving the population to endure conditions of poverty. The contradiction between the official narrative and the actual living conditions of the people underscores the pervasive disinformation and control present in North Korea. This pattern of misrepresentation and blatant economic disparity would continue to be a recurring theme as we research further into North Korea's history. Kim Il-sung persisted in steering the country according to his vision, championing Juk, meaning self-reliance, as the official ideology of North Korea. This slogan, developed in the late 1950s, aimed to make North Korea self-sufficient. Ironically, while promoting self-reliance, the North Korean elite, a new class that emerged, demonstrated an insatiable appetite for quality and luxury products from Japan and the West. This glaring contrast played out against the backdrop of the wider population in North Korea suffering without adequate food or housing. Despite the state-controlled press working diligently to control the narrative and present an idealized version of life in North Korea, the truth about the common person's living circumstances began to reach South Korea, the West, and Japan through defectors. These individuals, who managed to escape the restrictive environment of North Korea, played a crucial role in shedding light on the stark disparities between the rhetoric of Juk and the harsh realities faced by the North Korean population. The philosophy of Juk, although serving to support Kim Jong-un's communist dictatorship, did little to improve the lives of ordinary North Koreans. Kim Il-sung strategically used Juk to mobilize the North Korean people against the perceived threat of foreign invasion. He initiated a series of mass campaigns aimed at strengthening the country economically, militarily, and culturally. However, one of Kim's significant challenges arose from the Sino-Soviet split, a geopolitical divergence between Russia and China that put North Korea's communist dictatorship in a precarious position. By 1960, relations between North Korea and the Soviet Union soured, as the Soviets believed Kim Jong-un aligned with the Chinese side in the split. This perception wasn't entirely accurate. Kim had hoped to leverage the tensions between the two nations to enhance North Korea's influence. However, falling out of favor with the Soviet Union had severe consequences. The aid and credit that North Korea had enjoyed from the Soviets became a significant void that China, at the time, lacked the capacity to fill. This development spelled doom for North Korea, and as a result, Kim's enthusiasm for Mao Zedong's policies dwindled. Analyzing these factors, what unfolds in the narrative of North Korea's decline? The inherent contradictions within Juk, the substantial military expenditures in the absence of Chinese and Russian aid, the failure of the collectivization program, and the rejection of free enterprise collectively led North Korea into a downward economic spiral, a fate shared by many communist dictatorships. The country's economic woes were exacerbated by a lack of foreign reserves and trade restrictions imposed by numerous Western nations, ultimately plunging North Korea into an economic depression. In simple terms, North Korea found itself grappling with a multitude of problems and a scarcity of allies. During this period, Kim intensified his control over the country, actively seeking opportunities to overthrow the South Korean government. The allure of power, even in times of profound struggle, fueled a persistent ambition to expand territorial dominance, setting the stage for even more challenges. By the 1970s, North Korea's economic predicament had reached dire straits. While people often assume rock bottom is the nadir, discovering lower depths proved to be a harsh reality. Even the tightly controlled state media struggled to present a positive image of North Korean life, with the official narrative acknowledging slight economic setbacks. Adding to the predicament, the Soviet Union's decision to cut off subsidized oil dealt a severe blow to North Korea. Simultaneously, the international price of oil soared to unprecedented heights. Coupled with North Korea's depleted reserves of foreign currencies, especially US dollars, this situation escalated into an economic emergency. The evident lack of allies, as previously mentioned, magnified the impact of sanctions and economic restrictions imposed on North Korea. The nation found itself grappling with an increasingly challenging economic landscape as its struggles became more pronounced on the global stage. Faced with dire circumstances, North Korea resorted to unconventional methods to raise funds. The regime, pressed by a shortage of US dollars, delved into illicit activities such as weapon sales, drug trafficking, and counterfeiting United States dollars. Kim Jong-un, in need of financial resources, allocated a significant portion to fund his expansive army, maintaining one of the world's largest standing forces even during times of economic hardship. The dynamics of leadership acceptance in Korea allowed Kim to persist in such endeavors, a phenomenon challenging for many to comprehend. Kim Il-sung propagated the idea through the communist-controlled press that the military buildup was essential for establishing independence from Chinese and Russian aid. However, in reality, China and Russia increasingly distanced themselves from North Korea, cutting off military and economic support. As the 1980s and 1990s unfolded, both governments began viewing Kim as an embarrassment due to numerous diplomatic blunders. These missteps included attempts to assassinate Park Chung-hee, the construction of invasion tunnels under the DMZ, and provocations of war with the United States and South Korea, exemplified by incidents like the Pueblo seizure. These actions left both China and Russia unenthusiastic about supporting North Korea. In the shadow of Stalin's legacy, which had itself been tarnished in Russia, Kim ruled North Korea in a distinctly Stalinist fashion. In a bid to bolster his nation's wealth, Kim turned to mining enterprises, utilizing forced labor in the mines and borrowing capital for equipment. However, even if the international community had been inclined to purchase North Korea's minerals, the plan unraveled with the collapse of mineral prices, throwing an already reckless strategy into disarray. The greatest brunt of these economic missteps fell upon the people who were already grappling with famine and a lack of basic necessities. Meanwhile, those in Kim's military, or the new class of North Korean leadership, remained largely insulated from these hardships. Despite the evident struggles, the propaganda machine continued to perpetuate the image of Kim's workers' paradise in North Korea. Nevertheless, the reality was stark, and Kim's empire was undeniably in dire straits. Kim's centrally planned economy, which heavily emphasized heavy industry, necessitated capital that the North Korean communist dictatorship lacked. This situation not only failed to prompt a change in strategy, but saw the persistence of a flawed approach as Kim continued to champion juche to the masses. Despite these efforts, it became painfully apparent that North Korea lagged far behind the rest of the world. The final blow came with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, removing one of North Korea's major allies from the equation. The nation found itself politically, economically, and militarily isolated, left with China as its sole major remaining ally. Perhaps encouraged by the shock of witnessing the nation's precipitous decline, or influenced by a combination of other factors, in 1994, Kim Il-sung passed away suddenly due to a heart attack. He was succeeded by his son, Kim Jong-il. Unfortunately, Jong-il's reign did not commence on a positive note. In what essentially marked his inaugural year in power, extensive flooding wreaked havoc on crops and infrastructure, triggering a 3-year famine. During this period, the state-run economy faltered, failing to produce enough food. Hundreds of thousands of people succumbed to starvation, and survivors, particularly children, endured severe malnutrition. Recognizing that the government offered little assistance, millions of North Koreans resorted to creating or smuggling goods for sale or barter to ensure their survival. This underground economy became the primary lifeline for the people. However, the government eventually intervened to curb these activities. Despite such measures, problems persisted. In typical North Korean fashion, Kim Jong-il's government introduced a new policy known as Songbin, or military first. This policy, reminiscent of his father's reign but with heightened emphasis, elevated the Korean People's Army to the state's most potent political and economic force. It also became the largest recipient of resources within the nation, solidifying the military's central role in North Korean governance. Under this new system, North Korea leveraged its nuclear reactors to initiate a nuclear weapons program, aligning with its long-standing commitment to maintaining a formidable military force, even in the face of economic challenges. This thematic emphasis on a strong army had been a consistent thread in North Korea's strategy for years. In July 2002, Kim Jong-il announced some limited reforms in an attempt to address economic issues. The government devalued the currency and permitted food prices to rise, hoping to stimulate agricultural production. Kim also declared the phased-out removal of food rationing systems and subsidized housing. Additionally, he introduced a trial family unit farming system, marking a departure from the collectivization policy implemented in 1954. The government established a special administrative zone in Sinuiju, granting local authorities near autonomy, particularly in economic affairs. Kim sought to replicate the success of free trade zones in China, but encountered little outside interest. Despite some optimistic speculation in the foreign press, the impetus behind these reforms was not fully realized. Large-scale decollectivization, similar to the Chinese model under Deng Xiaoping, did not materialize. Instead, attention was directed toward the nuclear program, where North Korea followed through on threats and conducted several tests to refine its capabilities. The nuclear agenda took precedence over comprehensive economic reforms. By this juncture, North Korea had embraced a defiant stance, acknowledging its status as an international outlier and asserting its autonomy. On December 19, 2011, North Korean state television reported the passing of one of the nation's leaders, Kim Jong-il. His son, Kim Jong-un, then in his mid-20s, ascended to the position of North Korea's third supreme leader. He was initially portrayed as a modern version of his grandfather, cultivating a strong impression at the beginning of his regime. Jong-un took measures such as demotions, and in some cases, executions of regime officials to solidify his power base. According to estimates from a South Korean spy agency, Kim may have purged approximately 300 individuals after assuming power. In 2014, the United Nations Commission of Inquiry accused the government of committing crimes against humanity. Furthermore, Jong-un's regime intensified its crackdown on border crossings and further restricted access to foreign media and the internet. A notable decline in defector numbers can be observed after Jong-un assumed power, reflecting the impact of his policies on limiting the movement of people out of North Korea. Hopes were raised that Kim Jong-un might take steps to improve North Korea's strained relations with the West, but to put it mildly, such hopes were not realized. On the contrary, he continued and expedited the policies of his predecessors, using power to threaten other nations, particularly South Korea and the United States, and accelerating the development and testing of nuclear weapons. In 2017, North Korea tested the Hwasong-15, an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of striking anywhere in the United States. Estimates suggest that North Korea's nuclear arsenal may consist of over 60 bombs, potentially including hydrogen bombs, and is also believed to possess chemical and biological weapons. The most of the nuclear tests in North Korea's history have occurred under Kim Jong-un. There seemed to be some diplomatic progress during the Trump administration, when Kim met with President Donald Trump at a summit in Singapore. The two leaders signed a declaration reaffirming a commitment to peace and denuclearization. The meeting was marked by a dramatic buildup, and the visual of Trump and Kim Jong-un walking toward each other from opposite sides of the joint security area in the DMZ was a historic moment, as acknowledged by President Moon. The first meeting between Trump and Kim in Singapore was the beginning of several diplomatic engagements, although many of them concluded without agreed-upon resolutions. However, with Kim Jong-un still in power today, the situation in North Korea remains as dire as ever. The country is grappling with peak levels of human rights violations, and its economy is in a state of profound distress. Beginning with human rights violations, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk has consistently voiced strong concerns. In a recent open meeting of the UN Security Council, Turk emphasized that while North Korea has experienced periods of severe economic difficulties and repression in the past, the current situation is especially troubling. Turk noted, "According to our information, People are becoming increasingly desperate as informal markets and other coping mechanisms are dismantled, while their fear of state surveillance, arrest, interrogation, and detention has increased. The people of North Korea are facing a compounded challenge, dealing with both economic hardships and heightened repression. A significant portion of these human rights violations is attributed to the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, who closed the borders of the nation in response to COVID-19, officially claiming containment as the reason. However, unofficially, Kim utilized the situation to intensify stringent measures on border patrols and tighten controls on citizens. Despite the pandemic's abatement, North Korean government restrictions have only expanded. Guards at the borders have been authorized to shoot any unauthorized individuals approaching, and the country remains closed to all foreigners, including UN staff. These measures seem excessive for COVID-19 concerns. Further evidence of human rights repression is seen in the severe consequences for engaging with reactionary ideology and culture, essentially meaning information from abroad, particularly from South Korea. Individuals caught viewing such material may face 5 to 15 years in prison, while those involved in distribution could be sentenced to life imprisonment or even face the death penalty. These restrictions severely limit personal freedoms and creative expression. Considering the daily lives of the people is indeed disheartening. Elizabeth Salmon, the UN Special Investigator on Human Rights in North Korea, concurred with Turk, emphasizing that North Koreans are succumbing to hunger, malnutrition, diseases, and a lack of access to healthcare. The overall human rights situation in North Korea remains dire. Apart from human rights violations, North Korea is grappling with severe economic challenges. Turk, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, notes that the government has largely shut down markets and other private means of income generation, increasingly criminalizing such activities. This, in turn, sharply constrains people's ability to provide for themselves and their families. Turk highlights the widespread use of forced labor, including in political prison camps, forced use of school children for harvesting, requirements for families to undertake labor and provide a quota of goods to the government, and the confiscation of wages from overseas workers. These measures primarily support the military apparatus and its weapon-building capabilities. It seems that the absence of an official peace treaty at the end of the Korean War in 1950–53 has allowed the continuation of militarization, justified by this frozen conflict, even at the expense of the citizens. Throughout each era of leadership under the Kims, people have consistently suffered, and the current situation, aggravated by hunger, is making them increasingly desperate. The militarization of the nation appears to take precedence over addressing the economic needs of its citizens. The dire economic situation in North Korea has resulted in a severe food crisis. A recent incident in which a starving man in his 70s protested outside the Communist Party office in Hyesan illustrates the desperation of the people. This incident, despite the risks of imprisonment or execution for causing disturbances, highlights the extent of the food and economic struggles within the country. According to the UN, between 2019 and 2021, 42% of North Koreans were malnourished. Poor weather conditions and a shortage of fertilizer, compounded by the country's self-imposed 3-year quarantine, contributed to a significant reduction in food production. The 2022 harvest was only 4.5 million tons, down by 3.8% compared to the previous year and more than 1.2 million tons, less than what the UN's World Food Program estimated as needed in 2019. North Korea's agricultural system has long failed to produce enough food for its population of 26 million. The famine in the 1990s resulted in significant casualties, ranging from 200,000 to 3 million. The current situation raises concern about the potential for further deterioration if the underlying issues are not addressed. The severity of the food crisis in North Korea is reflected in the soaring prices of rice and maize, which constitute 98% of the country's cereal production. Both commodities reached 5-year highs, indicating the gravity of the situation. Maize prices, in particular, are rising rapidly, suggesting that North Koreans may be forced to rely on this less calorific crop. The World Food Program, a United Nations agency that provides food assistance globally, has tripled its budget for North Korea. However, the impact has been limited as UN agency staff are currently barred from entering the country, and there is no indication of this restriction being lifted. Despite the dire circumstances and citizens facing starvation, the North Korean regime, led by Kim Jong-un, has rejected foreign aid, dismissing it as poison candy and an insult to the country's honor and dignity. South Korea has offered aid contingent on North Korea resuming negotiations on its nuclear weapons program, but Kim Jong-un sees nuclear arms as essential to the survival of his regime. The possession of nuclear weapons allows North Korea to maintain influence on the international stage, and Kim is unwilling to relinquish this perceived guarantor of his regime's existence. Survival despite challenges. Advocates for this perspective might highlight instances where North Korea has weathered crises, such as the Korean War, economic difficulties, and political isolation. The regime's ability to adapt and survive could be seen as a sign of resilience rather than impending collapse. Claims of economic growth. Proponents of the idea that North Korea is not falling might point to official reports within the country that highlight economic growth or positive developments. They may argue that the external narrative does not accurately reflect the internal reality. Leadership stability. The regime's ability to maintain stable leadership under the Kim family for several decades might be cited as evidence of internal cohesion and control, contrary to the notion of imminent collapse. It's crucial to approach these counterpoints critically and consider the broader context. The lack of transparency within North Korea, limited access for independent verification, and the regime's tight control over information make it challenging to assess the country's true situation. While different perspectives can contribute to a comprehensive understanding, it's essential to evaluate evidence and multiple sources to form an informed opinion. The argument presented by scholars Kim Ki and Yeonju Choi suggests that despite challenging economic conditions and external pressures, North Korea has taken deliberate steps to enhance its survival capacity. Key points from their perspective include reform and openness. The North Korean government has pursued a policy of reform and openness since the early 2010s. This strategy aims to strengthen the country's ability to survive despite facing strong economic sanctions. Shift to economy-first approach. In 2018, North Korea shifted its national strategy from a military-first approach to an economy-first one. This shift indicates a prioritization of economic development as a means of ensuring the nation's survival. Diversification of economic policies. The government has implemented a range of economic changes, including import substitution and domestic production, competitive systems, market expansion, financial institution reforms, establishment of commercial banks, and promotion of science and technology. Socialist corporate responsible management system. The adoption of this system grants substantive management rights to firms, allowing them to autonomously run businesses. This approach is intended to increase production and facilitate distribution, particularly in light industry and agriculture. Field responsibility system. This system permits individual farmers to be rewarded based on their crop yields, providing incentives for agricultural productivity. Import substitution policy. The government has focused on reducing dependence on foreign goods through an import substitution policy, leading to a rapid increase in the proportion of domestically manufactured products in markets. It's important to note that this perspective offers an alternative view that challenges the narrative of an imminent collapse of the North Korean economy. However, assessing the accuracy of these claims is challenging due to limited transparency and external verification in North Korea. The effectiveness of these economic policies and their impact on the nation's long-term stability remain subjects of debate and speculation. The scholars argue that given the prevailing conditions, including the international sanctions regime, North Korea may find it challenging to achieve economic prosperity through its self-reliant strategy. However, maintaining the status quo or achieving a low level of gradual economic development could be feasible. They emphasize the relative stability of exchange rates and market prices for essential items. Furthermore, the scholars suggest that denuclearization remains an option for North Korea. By meeting outlined conditions, the country could integrate back into international markets and experience economic growth. This perspective challenges the notion of an imminent collapse and views it as a persistent fallacy, even a mythology, in U.S. foreign policy thinking. The future of North Korea is a complex and debated topic. The geopolitical landscape, international relations, and the choices made by North Korean leadership will all play crucial roles in shaping the nation's trajectory. The mention of a secret plan involving meetings between Kim Jong-un, Vladimir Putin, and Xi Jinping adds an element of intrigue and raises questions about potential shifts in alliances and strategies. As always, geopolitical situations are dynamic and subject to change, and it's challenging to predict with certainty what lies ahead for North Korea. Public discussion and diverse perspectives contribute to a more comprehensive understanding of complex global issues. Kim Jong-un appears to be strategically fostering closer ties with both Russia and China to strengthen North Korea's position against the United States, South Korea-Japan trilateral coalition. By hosting delegations from these nations, he sends a message that North Korea, China, and Russia stand united, with implicit backing for his weapons program. The geopolitical context involves North Korea's effort to balance its dependence on China by seeking an alternative option in Russia. Despite the historical significance of China's support during the Korean War and the 1961 Alliance Treaty, North Korea aims to diversify its alliances. Kim Jong-un may be attempting to leverage Russia's isolation and desperation following its invasion of Ukraine to gain additional advantages, possibly including access to weapons technologies that China might be hesitant to transfer. However, Kim Jong-un faces challenges that his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, didn't encounter. The current strong partnership between Russia and China, united against the United States and its allies, limits North Korea's ability to exploit differences between these two nations. Unlike the past, where Sino-Soviet relations were strained, the present sees China and Russia avoiding competition for influence in North Korea. The absence of such competition reduces North Korea's leverage in exploiting differences between its two allies. The analysis concludes by highlighting the complexities in North Korea's current geopolitical situation. While Kim Jong-un seeks closer ties with both Russia and China to strengthen North Korea's position against the United States, South Korea-Japan trilateral alliance, the power dynamics between China and Russia play a significant role. China, being the greater economic and militarily powerful nation, has the upper hand in this triangular relationship. Unlike the historical context during the Sino-Soviet split, neither Russia nor North Korea can or want to form an alliance directed against China. Kim Jong-un may be able to procure advanced military technologies from Russia, but he must carefully consider China's potential reaction, especially regarding significant decisions such as nuclear tests. The revived trilateral alliance involving the United States, South Korea, and Japan will consolidate the China-North Korea-Russia security bloc. However, it's emphasized that this doesn't grant Kim unlimited autonomy. The analysis acknowledges that the current situation is not a replication of 1961 and speculates on how events might unfold, leaving open the question of whether North Korea is witnessing its last days or if a potential recovery lies ahead.